I spoke before in a previous video about the importance of balancing thermal comfort with climate when pursuing sustainable design. And this is really not rocket science. The thinking behind this comes off the fact that we spend about 80% of the energy of the home either heating water or acclimatizing our spaces to meet our comfort demands. If we could simply match these demands with good architecture and quality spaces, that energy consumption will all but disappear. Now, I'm not saying that this is the goal we have to pursue. I'm not saying we have to achieve spaces that consume no energy at all, but I'm thinking that we can do a lot to meet this demand through passive strategies, and in turn, we'll also achieve higher quality spaces. For me, that's what sustainability is all about. We've already covered how to analyze a climate. I did that in a previous video. Just for you to know, that's something we have to do first. Analyze the climate so as to see what it is we actually need to meet these thermal demands. Once we have a better grasp of what the climate is like, we can then start balancing it with thermal comfort. So this video will focus precisely on that. We will first discuss a few basic yet maybe fancy terms, such as metabolic rate, which is crucial when understanding comfort. I will then cover quickly the conventional comfort theory, which is the mainstream theory and has been since the 70s. I'll also be arguing in about 5 minutes why I believe that this is no longer valid, it just cannot keep up, especially if we're doing sustainable design. And I'll move on to discuss the more progressive adaptive comfort theory. I'll also share with you different adaptive strategies, and we'll touch on the psychological effect of these strategies upon comfort. Because comfort is not just a physiological state, but it's also, to a degree, a state of mind. Finally, you'll understand why this approach is better suited to match sustainable design. First things first, metabolic rate. Before diving into the different comfort theories, let's first touch on the concept of thermal balance. Through our metabolism, we're constantly losing heat as a byproduct of the processes our bodies carry out to convert the chemicals we ingest through food into the mechanical energy we need to go about our lives. The amount of heat dissipated this way depends on how effective our bodies are in carrying out these processes, and this will depend on individual factors such as age, general body shape, gender, and so on. It is also directly related to the physical activity being carried out. As an example, I'm sitting here staring at the camera in a rather sedentary position. I'm radiating anywhere from 60 to 90 watt hours. So you can see more values as a reference here in this table. If, for any reason whatsoever, our bodies simply cannot dissipate heat, the body just shuts down and we're going to get a heat stroke. The discomfort one feels is a signal our bodies are sending to our brain to indicate that we're approaching this state and we can no longer dissipate heat at the rate that it is being generated. The opposite is also true. If we're dissipating heat at a terribly fast rate, our bodies will also signal to us that we're too cold and we have to do something to alternate our environment. A state of thermal balance then would be when we are in equilibrium with our environment, and that would be thermal comfort. We'll start with the conventional comfort theory, which is the one that I said is the mainstream theory ever since the 1970s. The quest for finding the ideal set of conditions for our buildings has been going on since the very beginning of the 20th century. Once we started incorporating ventilation systems into our buildings, it naturally followed that this air that we were pushing through these systems had to be controlled. A combination of cheap energy and lack of environmental awareness pushed this agenda forward even more so. And all this just begged the question, what is the ideal temperature for which everybody is comfortable? It was actually a very popular topic back in the 1950s, 60s, and 70s. This question led to climate chamber studies pioneered by Pavel Obeli-Fanger, a Danish scientist who focused all his life to thermal comfort studies. And he set out to answer precisely this: which were the temperatures at which the people felt predominantly comfortable at. The premise for this study, being led in a climate chamber, stated that a person comfortable in Madrid would also be comfortable in Stockholm, for instance, under the same environmental conditions. These studies were carried out to determine at which temperature mechanical systems had to push the air through their ducts. Meaning that this question actually started out from mechanical systems themselves, taking for granted that of course we always need them, but yet somehow forgetting that we're doing just fine without them. A model resulted out of these studies. At the time, this was a great breakthrough, establishing for the first time thermal comfort targets. These targets were quickly adopted into legislation. It's important to note that this study was also quite forward-thinking by allowing some margin of error, so accepting that not all people are going to be comfortable under the same conditions. However, though it did provide a foundation into thermal comfort studies, it did have its setbacks. Most notably, it armed architects, engineers and bureaucrats with targets which are just unattainable through sustainable means throughout the year in almost all climates, thereby justifying a new dependence on energy. And this of course started at an abuse of energy consumption, and it set it as a status quo which is now very hard to push back against. So now in comes the adaptive comfort theory, and this is where things get exciting, at least for me. Members from the scientific community started noticing something a bit strange. People were actually reporting to be comfortable in temperatures that fall significantly off Pavel's original model. Now this happened of course in free running buildings that simply didn't have air conditioning systems. So scientists, probably emboldened by the crises of the 1970s, started looking into these and started finding correlations between outdoor air temperatures and reported comfort temperatures. This led another scientist called Humphreys to establish a positive relationship between outdoor air temperature and acceptable levels of comfort. For the first time, comfort was no longer being seen as something intrinsic to the person, but rather as something influenced by the environment that that person is in. Now, the equation originally proposed by Humphreys put a lot of weight into the effect of outdoor air temperature in our comfort. Too much weight actually for the scientific community. So yet another scientist came in, Robert de Deer, and he reworked Humphreys' equation and he proposed a new model of thermal comfort, which is quite simple actually. It equates comfort to 17.8 plus a third of the mean outdoor air temperature. So now let's apply that model to the climate of Belgium. And again, as a recap, in this chart, you will see in the y-axis the temperatures in degrees Celsius, and in the x-axis the frequency of said temperature for each month. If we apply the Deer's model, this is what we get. But then that model also says that we can add and subtract 2.5 degrees Kelvin, therefore creating a thermal comfort band. This band is for 90% acceptability. We can add and subtract another degree Kelvin and we can account for 80% acceptability. At this point, I'd like to point out that this model was set to meet thermal comfort demands for sedentary activities, but it has also seen some pushback as people report that it's even better to sleep, for instance, with 14 degrees Celsius, and in many cases more than 28 degrees are more than welcome. If you are in a sandy beach and have the possibility to swim in the ocean, that's just great. And that leads us into the adaptive comfort strategies. Now, according to Professor Nick Baker, who is a delightful scholar who I had the pleasure of having as a tutor, adaptive comfort strategies can be subdivided into three categories: personal, building, and systems and controls. At a personal level, adaptability simply means having the possibility of getting up from one spot and moving to a warmer or cooler one, depending on our comfort demand, removing a jacket or putting on an extra layer of clothing. These are all at the personal level. Then at the building level, it's similar. It's the ability to open a window, close a shutter or a blind, close a door. You get the idea, I hope. And then at the systems and controls level, it goes a step further. References the ability to turn on a fan or raise up the heating in the radiator, lower down the AC, that kind of thing. These have a positive impact in our feeling of thermal comfort if they're easy to operate and they can be individually adjusted. Because if I have to acclimatize myself to my neighbor's thermal demands, that's probably not going to cut it, and it's actually going to stress me out even more, as we'll see in just a minute. And now we're getting into a territory where people can get a bit more skeptical. So what this argues is that in many instances, the simple fact that I have the opportunity of opening a window if I'm hot or removing a clothing layer already increases my thermal comfort band, so my tolerance. I would run into lower stress if I'm allowed to control my environment or my reaction to that environment through the personal strategies. What this alludes is that I don't actually need to remove a jacket, a clothing or layer, open a window. I don't need to do any of that, but I need to know that I can do that to get positive effects. Now, this is probably easier to understand if I make an example of the contrary. So, if you're forced to be in one space where you're not particularly comfortable, you're going to focus on that discomfort that you're feeling. If you're free to move around, you're probably not going to even notice that discomfort. And this is important because it allows us to circle back to what we were saying at the top. If one is forced to be seated in a climate chamber, reporting the state of comfort they feel when temperatures are just moving around without them being able to do anything other than sit there and get bored, that shifts their focus solely to what they're feeling. So that actually narrows down significantly the comfort band and the levels of comfort one would report while being part of this experiment. I said comfort was tricky, and it's precisely because of this. It's not only elusive because we all experience comfort differently, but it's also because our minds play a big and significant role in what our comfort actually means to us. So again, I'll go back to Nick Baker and I'll show you this wonderful graph. So under the first scenario, the individual has a large amount of adaptive opportunities at his or her disposal, so larger temperature deviations can and are tolerated. But as we move on to the third scenario, these strategies disappear, and this is where stress kicks in. So now to our conclusions. Why is this important, you may ask? Well, I'm glad you did. We have to understand that there is no magical set of conditions to work with in order to have everybody be comfortable. That shouldn't be a blank check saying, okay, since nobody's going to be comfortable, I'm just going to design a crappy building where it's going to overheat and people are just going to be miserable. Not at all. The contrary, actually. We have to pay attention to the environments we're creating and allow for adaptive strategies to take place in their own. So we have to carefully design our windows so that they're easily operable, and the shutter, for instance, doesn't interfere with the opening of the window. So if a place has a lot of light and is experiencing glare and I have to bring down the shutter, okay, that should not intervene with ventilation being increased by the opening of a window, because this is what happens during the summertime. We also should acknowledge that the activities taking place in our buildings are not all the same. When I'm cooking, I'm standing, I have the cooker on, that's emitting heat. I'm emitting more heat than when I'm seated eating. Now this is just nuance, but you get the idea of what I'm trying to illustrate. Once again, I'm at the end. If you made it this far, I'm incredibly grateful. Thank you for your time and attention. I truly appreciate it, and consider taking a look around at the other videos I'm posting, as this is one of a series of videos about sustainable design, comfort, and so on. New videos will be coming out every week, so hope to see you again. Bye.